intentions this morning as we study from your word, contemplate your Son. We pray, Father, that you'll help that to impact us and cause us to be better and better students of yours, that are children before you. We ask you to continue to forgive us of our wrongs, and Lord, we want to be your light in this community. We lift up Gary as he continues to get better, and we pray for Ruth Miller as she's dealing with pneumonia. We pray for Diana as she's getting ready for her surgery, and Temple as he's getting ready for his surgery. We pray that those will both go well. We're extremely grateful to see Sister Pam back among us, and we're grateful she's feeling better. Lord, we're touched by the flowers that are here today representing the relationship that Harry and Sarah have shared over the years, and we're grateful to be a part of their lives. We pray that you'll continue to bless them and encourage them, help them to be healthy and strong, and to continue to love and show your love to others around. We ask you to hear us in Christ's name. I am grateful for Harry as much as I put up with it and put on him. He's a pretty good boy. He's a good old boy. He's the definition of a good old boy, isn't he? All right. We launched into our walk with Christ at the cross a couple weeks ago, and I know 2 weeks is hard to maintain. Ideas of flow is even hard week to week, and I'm almost compelled to hurry so I can get as much in every week as I can. But I'm afraid if we do that, we don't get the intensity that we want to get. So maybe we'll do this. Well, you'll dictate how much, because the more you put in, the more you're going to get out. We don't have any place to be other than here, so I guess we don't have to hurry through. Even though I'm wishing we could do this all in a couple of days. Just spend some couple of days intensely looking at these last few hours of Christ's life. We left off last week, 2 weeks ago, in Philippians chapter 2. Jesus had emptied himself, and I'm going to pick up there quickly and then launch into chapter 2. As we go from this place, how dependent did Jesus make himself on God? How dependent did Jesus make himself on God? When he, in Philippians 2, he left heaven, he emptied himself, took on the form of a bondservant. How dependent did he become on God? Totally dependent. 100% dependent upon God. He put himself in God's hands and trusted him in all things. The perfect example of what we're supposed to be doing. We ought to trust him as much as we possibly can, and not try to do things that God needs to take care of, because we mess up so many times. Somebody look at John 5, 19 and 20. John 5, 19 and 20. Read that for me.
Therefore John answered and was saying to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, these things the Son also does in like manner. For the Father knows the Son and shows him all things that he himself is doing, and the Father will show him greater works than these, so that you will marvel.
All right, so Jesus said he could do nothing of himself. He was only doing what the Father granted him to do. We need to keep that in mind when we go through this. He didn't go through it in appearance. He went through it like we would. If there's hurt, if there's insult, if there's grief, we would have felt it. He would have felt it the same way we would feel it today. And so he emptied himself completely. Why do you think dying was especially difficult for Christ?
gonna be separated from God.
Say again?
He was gonna be separated from God.
He was gonna be separated from God. Okay, humans always, in my experience, are hesitant about death. Even the most confident of us don't know what's on the other side, what's going to feel like, how are we going to make the transition. Anticipation is scary. Is that right? I mean, even the most faithful people who are ready to go home, it seems to me, have those deep breaths they need to take. Right?
Even though we read about it, it's still unknown, I'll say to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, how can we know? We've never experienced it before. And there are a lot of things in life that we anticipate and think it's either going to be really wonderful or really bad, but we don't know till we go through it. Right? And I believe death is one of those activities. I would submit to you that one of the reasons that Jesus' death was so excruciating was because he was the essence of life. All of life, he spoke into existence. Nothing was created without him. Life sprang from this man, and death must have been terrifying to him. It seems to me that would be so hard for him to embrace because he is life. He declares himself to be life. And so we start thinking about all of this. It's difficult for us to die, and our whole bodies would probably rather not die, but it's ours to do, and it was Jesus's to do, and he went through that as he was supposed to. All right, we're going to move into a different look this morning. I probably should have had these handed out at the door. But let me tell you about this. These little pages I'm handing out to you are taken from The Life of Christ in Stereo. It was a work of many years by a man named Johnston Chaney. Before there were computers, he worked to make a harmony of all of the Gospels so that they spoke one story. You can read all of the last few hours of Christ. In fact, you can read all of the Gospels. I brought my copy of this thing. This is The Life of Christ in Stereo. I looked online today. I saw one that's this printing from '69 that was about $14, $15. The rest of them they wanted $70, $80, or $100 for them, and you couldn't buy mine for that. Mine is used and read so many times that the texts are falling apart. But I love the book because the man spent a lifetime trying to hear the story of Jesus in one telling. So what he did was take phrases from Matthew, or even sentences, sometimes paragraphs would be just Matthew, because only Matthew wrote about something. But where it's written, where there's 3 or 4 stories, he put the phrases that Matthew would have used, that Mark would have used, that John would have used, and in your little page today, we're going to be reading some of those. And where it says 1, that's what Matthew wrote. Where it has 2, superscript, it'll be Mark and Luke and then John. And I'm going to be bringing excerpts from this book each week to read because we're going to try to do what McAllister did in the book that The Life of Christ The Walk of Christ on the Cross. He used that as his background to tell just one story. And that's what we're going to try to do as we go through this. So I'll bring you excerpts every week or most weeks because we will be using texts from those from this Life of Christ in Stereo. Today we're going to look at the evening of Thursday, about 6 o'clock in the evening to about 11:30 p.m. in the last few hours of Christ's life. So from Thursday 6 to about 11 or 11:30. What's the reason Jesus came to earth? The main reason Jesus came to earth.
To seek and to save the law.
Okay? Okay, somebody look up Matthew 20, verse 28. That is the correct answer, but this is a little different text here.
Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
All right, so what I'm wanting us to do is, he came to serve, and this look that we're trying to take in the next few weeks is going to help us to get a deeper, I think, connection with the things Christ was feeling, the things he was seeing, trying to draw out in some of us the total experience. And we're going to begin with the Last Supper. It took place in the upper room in Jerusalem, celebrated the Passover with his disciples. This was no ordinary Passover supper, because this is going to be the last time Jesus eats with his disciples until he's resurrected from the dead. So he had a lot going on that morning, and that evening rather, and perhaps the most direct moment of the supper came in the revealing of the ugly thought that one of his disciples was going to betray him. The betrayal is going to lead to Jesus' arrest and his betrayal announcement is what we're going to spend a few minutes looking at here in just a moment. May seem somewhat strange to us, because if I came to your house or you came to my house for a meal, what would be the arrangements? How would we take the meal together? Where would we be? Sitting around the table. Usually sitting around the table. Sometimes you come to my house, watch a ball game, you sit in the living room and you have pizza in a piece of styrofoam so you can eat in there. But generally speaking, if we got together for Thanksgiving or even just a casual dinner together, we'd be sitting around the table. You know how they ate especially at formal gatherings most of the time? Yeah, reclining on pillows, and we need to get in our head. I usually, when I'm doing this with the kids, we all kind of get around, and I don't think this is the place for us to do this. We get around a table with pillows under us, and we're leaning on our left hand, or we have our left hand out of the way because we're going to be eating with our right hand, and the table is somewhat low, and we're going to be reaching for items on the table. We're reclining. So, if I'm reclining next to one of you, how are we going to be situated? All right. So basically, somebody's head's going to be right about here, and my head's going to be about there for somebody else. Okay. So would it be somewhat intimate?
If your neighbor was left-handed.
If your neighbor was left-handed, he didn't eat that way, because in those days, and still in some cultures, you do not eat with your left hand, because your left hand is for other purposes. Ignoble purposes. You don't touch your food with your left hand, even if you're left-handed. So that's the story I'm told anyway, and I know that's true in cultures today where they eat a lot with their hands. So you can imagine somewhat the intimacy of at least the two that are close together. You've been at tables where there are a whole bunch of people and you're not very intimate with the ones that are down on the other end. They're having their conversation, you're having your conversation. Right? So I want us to keep that in mind as they're looking here, they're lying on pillows and they're at one another's chest or in their torso. And I can imagine this supper being a very solemn time. I believe it was a celebration most of the time when you took the Passover, because ultimately you're celebrating what took place and how God had demonstrated his love for you back in Egypt, right? But I see this as something of a solemn situation in the first paragraph in your little boxed paper that I handed out today. Somebody read the first paragraph.
When Jesus had said these things, and while they reclined at the table and were eating, he became troubled in spirit and testified, saying, Verily, verily, I say to you, that one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me.
So when you read that passage, what jumps out to you? The jump out to me is, one who's eating with me is going to betray me. Did you pick up on he became troubled in the spirit? You're at supper, celebrating the Passover. Do you suppose this manifested itself on the face of Jesus? If he became troubled in spirit, knowing he is about to have to make this announcement, make this declaration, I believe those who were around might have been able to see that he was troubled in his spirit. You ever had a thought that when you had the thought, it shook you? I mean, something hit you, and it was so different than anything you'd ever thought about yourself or anything you'd ever experienced. You ever had a thought like that? Sure. Like, is it something you can share? And no? Okay. I've had a couple of those. I came back from Jamaica, my first ever mission trip. And I was so excited about the things I had done. I baptized people in the Caribbean and in a pool at the University of the West Indies. I'd done it. I'd been on a mission trip, and it was wonderful. And we had so much fun. I went to the hospital where my mother was being treated for breast cancer. And when I got to the room, expecting to tell her the story, she didn't recognize me. When I left the hospital that day on the way home, I stopped the car and wept because I knew my mom was not going to get well. I've been praying for her to overcome cancer. I've told y'all about that before. That I believe my mom overcame cancer by her faith growing and her sharing what she did with us and the way she shared it with other people around. But the fact that my mom was not going to survive took me a long time to acknowledge. Maybe I should have seen it beforehand. I guess all our moms are going to die, right? So that kind of moment and your emotions, you can't keep them hidden. They brought a little girl to our house she was 18 months. She'd already been in 5 homes, foster child, and they were going to terminate her parents' rights and send her to a permanent home, and she was going to be with us for about 3 or 4 months. At 14 months, she was still at our house. There was a lot of trouble getting the legal things done. She'd gone through skull surgery and eye surgery at our house. And they called one evening and said, we found the permanent family for this little girl. We'll be by tomorrow to pick her up. They're going to take her. We signed up for them to take her. Do you suppose that was a heavy moment? Can you picture what I would have looked like when they said that to me? They picked her up at a youth rally. We were at Westbury. I took the teens from Alvin to Westbury. They picked her up at Westbury because it was convenient. That's one of their offices were pretty close. I had a busload of teenagers in the building at Westbury, and I sat on the curb and cried. Jesus was disturbed, troubled in his spirit at this situation. By the way, after 3 or 4 months, Beth came back to us, and she is our adopted daughter and the mother of our grandchildren, 2 of our grandchildren. So there's a lot more to that story, and if you want to hear it, I'll gladly tell you about that. But and not all of that's wonderful. But when you have these moments, sometimes you're scared to death. Sometimes you feel absolutely empty. You've had them, have you not? Can you picture Jesus having a moment like that? Most often we don't think of him having those kinds of feelings or having to deal with those kinds of things. But the people around him surely would have seen it. And then when he makes his little announcement that somebody in that room, reclining at that table, was going to become an instrument of Satan and deliver him to his enemies. You ever been betrayed by somebody you thought you could trust? Doesn't feel good, does it? Doesn't feel good. I've got some stories about that, but I won't tell you those this morning.
Is this the King James version that you're?
You know what? I don't know the answer of that. Let me see if it says it in here.
Because I've looked at 2 other versions and it's not. They're not describing it as. I mean, I definitely believe he was troubled in spirit.
Okay. Which part does it say that was from?
The English is just saying.
Okay, let me go back.
It doesn't talk about the emotions of it.
We need to ask him which one of these.
So it's
Matthew 26.
it's in John that said he became troubled in spirit. John 13:21.
After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me.
What version are you reading?
New International.
New International says troubled in spirit.
The English does too.
The what?
The English does too in John, but not in
well,
Matthew.
see, when you're reading that little paragraph at the beginning, it starts with John when Jesus said these things. Then it goes to Mark chapter 14, and while they were reclined at the table, they were eating. And then John says he became troubled in the spirit. So it's not reading all of Mark's verse; it's reading the phrase leading up to the scene. Does that help you understand
Yes.
the concept of what we're trying to do with this little box a little better? Thank you for bringing that up. And I still didn't find whether this is King James. I probably can't find out what he used, but it was the predominant version in use when he was doing most of this work.
Verily. It's
Verily,
verily.
Yeah. What does that mean? Truly. Okay.
Quotes out of this in the New American Standard Bible.
Out of this, but out of this is what she's asking. Yeah. And it may be New American Standard, maybe what was going on. Maybe that's what Cheney was using, and that's maybe why McAllister used it. Maybe. So the news that one of these men in the room is going to gonna betray him must have hit the guys around the table, with like a ton of bricks, or they were shocked. Don't expect to go to dinner with Jesus and be told somebody's gonna betray him. Right? You're one of the 12, you've been seeing all these things, you don't expect this kind of situation. Don't you think that maybe a hush fell over the room when Jesus made this statement that one of you is going to betray me? And you can almost see the guys thinking, who is it? Looking around the room, can't you just see yourself looking at the other guy around the table, wondering which one it is? And it's not evident on anybody's face. Is it possible you might begin to wonder, could it be me? Could it be me who's going to betray Jesus? It must have gotten to that place of thinking, because at one point in the conversation, every guy said, is it me? So this announcement stirred not only curiosity about who might do it, it led to the place where you evaluated your own self. Peter asking himself, John asking himself, all of the guys apparently said, Lord, is it me?
Are these disciples still of the mind that Christ is going to establish a kingdom and he's going to be the king?
Obviously, they are at the place where they don't know yet, because even until they meet out on the seashore, they don't completely understand. And I guess actually not till the day of Pentecost do they fully understand. But yes, I think they have an idea, because they've already announced you're the Christ. Where would we go? All of that's behind them. This is the last few hours before Jesus actually dies. Thursday night before he dies on Friday. So here we are in this situation, and these guys are wondering, what in the world is going on here? And what weakness in your life would cause you to think, oh, I could betray Jesus? Don't answer the question. That's a rhetorical question. Is there anything in your life, if I asked you today, and if you had to announce it, you'd all say, there's nothing that would cause me to deny Christ. But you know you. Is there something in your life that maybe you need to focus on improving, shoring up your faith, determining your commitment being more and more what it ought to be instead of what it is at this point in time? So these guys got to the place where they had to evaluate themselves. And I believe we ought to evaluate ourselves always in our relationship to Jesus Christ. And then I believe a hush fell over while these guys are getting to the place where they ask. And finally somebody breaks the silence. Look at the third paragraph in your little handout for today. Somebody read that for me.
And he answered and said to them, it is one of the 12, one who is dipping with me in the dish. Behold, moreover, the hand of the one betraying me is with me on the table. And the Son of Man indeed is going, as it has been determined, as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. It were good for that man had he not been born.
Up until this moment, apparently, Judas had not yet had a reaction that anybody could read. But I bet there were things going on in his mind. How much does Jesus know? What has he learned? Who told him? How did he get this information? And is he going to reveal it before everybody else? Would that put a little fear in your mind if you had just been announced, or Jesus had just announced, somebody's going to betray me, and you're the one that has that in mind, and here you are with the other 11 guys? Would you be a little hesitant for Jesus to tell all of them what you're about to do? Okay. this, and especially selling him out for that price, right? So I think Judas had some things in his mind, and here he is wanting to know what to do next. And I don't know whether he was across the table or if he was close to Jesus. I tried to figure out in my mind how they were seated. I always picture John closest to Jesus. I have no reason to do that except the one that he loved. You know, John calls himself the one that Jesus loved. I always picture Jesus and John closest together. But if we went around the circle, what if the one that was farthest from Jesus was behind him? They're next to each other, and Jesus is at his breast, right, his chest. Right? So what if the exchange was between two people that close together? Yes.
You know, 12 people is a lot to go around the table. It's probably not a very big table, so they would be lined out like spokes in a wheel. So
Okay.
you could have a big bowl in the middle.
Right.
And be reaching across.
Yeah, and depending on they were in an upper room that was prepared for this thing. So to me, it's something of a menu. But if you were in somebody's home, you couldn't have big tables. Most of them wouldn't have had big tables for a dozen people or 15 people to be around. And I'm with you. I think they might have been more head to head and a lot of their body out pointing toward the walls. Like you said, spokes. I always see it as a clock face, you know, with the hands going out. But here it is. He says, "Rabbi, is it me?" And Jesus says to him, "It is as you have said." He said that out loud. Or did he whisper? Huh? It doesn't sound like the others got it. I'm wondering, could he have been across the table and spoken it to him so quietly that only he saw and heard the message? You could be in a room where you're communicating with somebody across the table and nobody else is really engaged. So really the position they were doesn't matter, but I believe Jesus said this to him in such a voice that only he and a very few could have heard this exchange. It is as you have said. And so here is that reality thrust out into the open between Christ and Judas. At least between the two of them, there's no playing the game anymore. Jesus just let him know, "I know what you were doing." Right? And Judas is reclining there, and so who is this man, Judas Iscariot? I'm going to spend a little bit of time on who he is today. The Bible doesn't give us very much of his background. We do learn some things about him that we could piece together. Some of his weaknesses, apparently he had some strengths as well, to be among that group and to have their trust. And apparently some of them were supporters of his. He was the treasurer of the disciples. You don't get to be the treasurer of everybody's money if they don't think you're going to take care of it, right? No? You're not going to make me the treasurer, are you? I might use the money to go to the ball game. I might use it to take you to dinner.
Evidently Judas did too.
Oh, yeah. Apparently he pilfered and they didn't know it, but you don't get to, they wouldn't have known he was a pilferer and made him the treasurer. So I think he at least had the appearance of being trustworthy. Apparently he had hopes that Rome would be overthrown and that Jesus was going to be that one who was going to overthrow them. And that was the prevalent thought among the disciples, that Jesus was going to be this king who was going to depose Rome and throw them out. Maybe knowing a little bit about the character that has been revealed about his is self-aggrandizement, you know, or selfishness. Maybe he wanted a big role in the kingdom. So Israel's going to be a big deal. And here I am, one of the 12, and I'd like to be
Secretary of the Treasury.
okay, so here I am. I'm looking for this thing. So perhaps he had wrong motives in all of the things, mixed up and or treacherous, one of the two, or maybe both combined. And here he has just been told by Jesus, "You're the guy, and I know you're the guy. I know what you're up to." And it must have been a really difficult moment for them. He'd been with Jesus when Jesus was healing the sick, feeding the thousands, and bringing the blind to see, all of that kind of stuff. And he wanted for the kingdom to come into full power. Maybe his motive was to prompt Jesus to do something, to put the plan into quicker motion than it had been moving. He didn't think the pace was moving, perhaps. He didn't seem to be able to get this young preacher to take the steps that he believed were necessary. If you were looking for an earthly king, what changes in Jesus's what activities of Jesus might disturb you about the way things are going up to this moment?
Well, he had been washing their feet. That didn't sound like a king.
All right, just a little while ago he washed their feet, and more he's saying, "I'm going to be killed. We have to go into Jerusalem." A week before, they're shouting his praises, right? And I'm going to be crucified, and all of these kind of things. And this wouldn't be in line with my thoughts of what you're supposed to be. If you're going to be the emperor that's going to dispose of our oppressors. And so maybe he was disappointed. Look at John. Well, no. Go back to John 6 in your mind. I don't want to read all of the text. We did that not too long ago when the disciples had been fed and they followed Jesus. What were they looking for? Food, more bread. You're the ones going to keep feeding us. We don't have to work. We can just sit here and eat. And they got disappointed. And when Jesus pointed out to them what he was calling for them to do, eat my flesh and drink my blood, sustain yourself on me, what did they do? They walked away. Well, Judas took another little side trip. He decided that he was going to do something significant, that he was going to do something to make a difference. And the crowd moving in the wrong direction doesn't preclude Judas from doing these kinds of things. We think about Judas and we get the idea that his own personal weakness is what led to his destruction. It's what led him to do the things that Jesus had just said he was going to do. You remember in the incident when Mary perfumed his feet. What was his reaction?
Because took that money and done a lot of things.
You could have done a lot of good. And obviously that wasn't what he really was concerned about. But he has moved in a direction, and what are the Jewish leaders looking for? What do they want to do? They do, but in this case, they're wanting to get rid of Jesus. They've already been trying to plot to find ways to get rid of Jesus, right? And so they need somebody to help them, to implement a plan. And Judas went to him and said, "Hey, let me help you a little bit." Matthew chapter 26, one of the 12, man, Judas Iscariot went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to deliver him up to you?" And they weighed out to him 30 pieces of silver, And from then on, he began looking for a good opportunity. They'd found their man. They had found their man. Put the money in his pocket and he's at the supper. Right? He's at the supper. A lot of people suggest that 20 pieces of silver, even in today, wouldn't be a lot of money. You know, we're not talking about a king's ransom. In the final appeal to Judas is where we'll stop for the day. Look at John 13, verses 23 through 30. If you read that.
One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. "What you are about to do, do quickly," Jesus told him. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast, or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night.
All right. Keep that scene in your mind for next week. We're going to come back and we're going to start talking about this scene where, who is it that Peter asks to get the word from? Who did Peter call out and say, "Hey, find out who it is"?
John.
It's John. Right? So here again, I think John is closest to Jesus, and Peter says, "Psst, psst, psst."
The disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining next to him.
I know, that's what I'm saying, and he's asking John. Peter's asking John, find out who it is. Okay, and that's what we're going to start discussing. And that's my star for start on 2:25. All right, thank you.